Welcome to Turning Point Leadership Podcast with your host, Ron Harvey of Global Core Strategies and Consulting. Ron's delighted you joined us and excited to discuss and help you navigate your journey towards becoming an effective leader. During this podcast, Ron will share his core belief that effective leadership is one of the key drivers towards change. So together, let's grow as leaders. Here's Ron Harvey.
Good afternoon. This is Ron Harvey. I'm the Vice President and the Chief Operating Officer for Global Core Strategies and Consulting, and we're a leadership firm based out of Columbia, South Carolina. And our primary role or function of our company is really to help organizations create a winning culture by developing leaders so they'll be more connected to the people they're responsible to and responsible for. Everything that we do is about helping leaders really get a competitive advantage on leading the teams across every industry that we have an opportunity to work with. But today I want to spend time with a good friend of mine, Patrick Jinks. And this is called Unpacked with Ron Harvey. And so this is not coming from this, let's have the correct answer or academic background, or we're perfect and have it together. We're really going to be, transparent and open about things that we've learned in our journeys, things that we learn from each other, things that we learn from working with our clients that made us more effective to run the businesses that we run and be able to serve the people that we serve. So this is a real open conversation. The questions are not pre-prepped, so nobody gets the questions in advance. And all of our guests have agreed that we will go along with what it is so they can just be really transparent, if you will. I'm honored to be able to introduce, but also interview. I don't think out of all the years, Patrick, I've been on the other side of the microphone asking you the questions. And so I'm excited to have Patrick Jinks from the Jinks perspective as our guest today. And he's on the other side of the microphone. And so, Patrick, you run a company just as I do. You do a lot of phenomenal stuff in the nonprofit space. I think you're the guru that I always call on, that I look for, that talks about nonprofit. I've learned a lot from you in that space. So I'm honored to have you here to be able to share with all of the listeners that follow us in our company and to add value to them. So, Patrick, what would you want us to know about you?
Well, thanks, Ron, for having me on. I think the first thing I'd want people to know is that I'm no guru of any kind. That's too much pressure. I can't live up to that. Well, here's what I say, Ron. I ask people what is common between Tiger Woods, Adele, Denzel Washington, Roger Federer, Jennifer Lawrence, and Oprah Winfrey. And the answer is they all use coaches. And there's other answers. They're all filthy rich.
Yes.
They're all highly successful, and yet they still have coaches. So the best way I can describe my business or the work that I do is I try to work with excellent leaders who are always wanting to level up, always believing there's more room for improvement, but they're in a space where they're leading effectively now and they're adding tremendous value. So I'm a coach, not a consultant. That's the other thing I always tell people. I don't come with the answers. So be careful with your questions. I probably don't have answers to them. I don't know.
Yes.
Maybe I'll answer your questions with other questions, but I have found in my work that helping my clients pause and ask the deep, right questions before they start just diving into conversations on strategy and intentions really helps them set a trajectory that's more meaningful, more clear, it's more simple, and it's aligned with what they want to do. So that's the long version. The short version is I'm a leadership coach.
Yes. And I think important as we unpack that, Patrick, you're absolutely right. So in your space and work that you do, as far as really pausing and helping people ask the right question, what are you noticing about our leaders having that skill set? Because that's not something, it's not a light switch. What are you noticing about our leaders today? Being able to be really good, coming up with really great questions to allow people to grow.
Two things come to mind on that, Ron. One is that, we are great at asking other people questions. We don't pause and ask ourselves questions for our sake a lot. I did a TEDx talk a few years ago and shared some research about how many questions we ask between the ages of 0 and 5. And it starts to, as we go through our school journey, the asking of questions just starts to plummet. By the time we're adults, we just don't ask as many questions. And that's how we learned. That was our primal tool when we were little. We asked why about everything and how do I and what about. And so we don't do that as much. The thing that I find with most leaders, most people, including myself, is that unless someone is there to, again, I call it a pause. I call coaching a forced pause.
Yes.
You're making this time to say, I'm going to pause and stop, and I'm going to focus on some questions right now that I'm not asking myself. I find some of the simplest questions, the ones that as they're coming out of my mouth, I think, man, this is not something that people should pay me money for. This is too simple a question. And yet, time and again, those are the ones that stop people in their tracks and go, man, I've never actually stopped and considered that simple of a question, and I'm overcomplicating it. Why am I not asking myself that? So I don't think it is a skill set that many people have. And if it's a skill, it's just not top of mind. And so we don't naturally go there. We have to stop and make it intentional. I have a friend, you know him. He calls me every Monday morning at 7:30 and he asks me two questions, the same questions every Monday morning. Where in the past week have I found myself being the person I want to be? And where in the past week have I found myself not being the person I want to be? Those are pretty simple questions.
Yes.
But having someone ask it to you, pause, set the time, ask it, make me think, make me answer it to somebody, that's where the power is. So I don't know how much of it is a skill set and how much of it is just a practice.
Yes. So, Patrick, it seems as though leaders do that well when they will be innovative and creative and they want to look at the bottom line. So, I don't think it's not they don't have the ability or the skill set. It's just where they're using it at. So, when you start talking about asking yourself the question, because I've watched companies ask in their products and their services and their deliverables, they ask a lot of questions. I've been in those boardrooms when they're looking at the bottom line and it's either reflecting what they wanted to reflect or not reflecting. They become really good at asking questions. Do you see where when we're asking ourselves questions, it becomes more difficult then? Because I've watched leaders ask questions.
Yeah, who cuts the barber's hair? Who fixes the plumber's sink?
Yeah.
As a coach, one of the things even now that I'm really trying to learn is how to coach myself, which I can't fully. I think you always need that external partner, but how to get in a mindset where I'm willing to ask myself some of the same questions. I asked you the other day, Ron, on our show about how you measure success in your business at Global Core.
Yes.
Well, as I pause, I got to go, what's my answer? How do I measure success at the Jinks perspective? I coached leaders on measurement and how they measure their mission and how they measure effectiveness. Who's asking me that question as a solopreneur? So I have to pause and ask myself some of those questions. And yeah, I think we're great. There's an organization that I'm related to. I call myself a teaching member because I'm a contributor to it. And they share the model. I've been certified in their model at Harvard. It's an organization called the Right Question Institute. And what I learned from them is if you think about three levels of teaching, level one, I tell, you learn, right? I say it, you pick it up, you remember it, there'll be a test, right? 2 + 2 = 4, and here's why. Level two is I ask questions that make you think at a more critical level. Ron, if I have 2 pennies and I add 2 more pennies, now how many do I have?
Yes.
Right. And so it's a different way to teach. The third level, which is where the Right Question Institute is trying to get people, is what if in teaching, I teach you how to ask your own questions? So I put, 2 + 2 on the board without an answer. And I ask you, what are your questions about this? And your questions might be, is the plus sign in the middle a T or is it a plus? And does it always have to be two? And what's the answer? And how do I come at this? So this is one of the things we try to do, for example, with boards of directors that we're working with, is we go through a question formulation process that they've never done. They've never had someone pause and say, we're going to do some question storming. And before, I'm not just going to ask you questions and have you answer them. We do a lot of that. But first, I'm going to ask, what are your questions? What are your questions about the next 10 years for your company? Boy, boards, when you ask them that question, what are my questions about the next 10 years? Gosh, how are we going to be sustainable? How will we remain relevant? How will the world have changed? What are the new fundraising techniques going to be? Where are our vulnerabilities? What can we achieve? And they come up with these tremendous questions and they go, man, why have we never asked these questions before? These are the ones we want to answer. And that's why when we ask our own questions, our appetite for finding the answers grows.
Wow. So when you think about the leader that's navigating in every industry right now, leadership is a challenge, whether it's nonprofit, for profit, whether it's in the school system or in political systems, leadership is becoming more challenging for people to lead. There are five generations in the workforce. There are all kinds of things that leaders have to address. What's your advice to, a young leader, a young Ron or a young Patrick that's in the leadership role? What's some advice you give to them to be effective as a leader, regardless of what space they find themselves in?
Yeah, connect to your people. And that advice is more important now, in my opinion, than it ever has been in the virtual world we're living in. You and I have had conversations about this. Leadership is not management, they're different things. Management is difficult enough in this remote world that we all live in, but leadership becomes a challenge because leadership requires relationship, requires connection. And no matter how you slice it, my bent on this. Virtual is great and use it as a tool and it leverages you. It gets you things that you couldn't get otherwise,
Yeah.
but it can't be a substitute for connection and it can never replicate actual connection with people. So it really, in leadership, I mean, there's a million different directions you can go: emotional intelligence and inspiration and vision and all those things. Right now, I'm really homed in on connect.
You're absolutely right, and I will endorse that 100%. You know how I feel about the connection for people. I said it's like your phone. You can have the best phone in the world. The minute they make you put it on airplane mode and shut your Wi-Fi down, it becomes a paperweight.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of leaders have found themselves as paperweights unintentionally because they're on airplane mode with their people, or they have a disconnect with Wi-Fi. How do you help a leader get connected that may not necessarily know how to do it effectively, consistently?
Oh, we have how much time left on this show? I'm just thinking out loud, Ron. What comes to my mind is that the quality of the connection is important, and so is the quantity of the connection. But I think quality probably trumps it.
Okay.
So rather than figuring out how many ways, how can I connect with my team more often during the week? That's a good question, and I'm all for pursuing that. Maybe right now, a more potent question for leaders is how can I make sure that whatever connection I can get with my people, I maximize it? And I draw from my people their best, and I offer to my people my best. And what's the quality of that connection? I'll give you a quick, this is coming to mind. One of the things that I share with organizations is that every moment, every interaction in an organization, for example, is a brand experience. The inter-office email, Ron sends a message to Patrick down the hallway. Hey, Patrick, can you send me that document? Right? Because we don't want to get up and actually go down the hall and see each other. God forbid we do that. That takes an extra 10 seconds. So we shoot an email. Well, that email is a brand experience because branding is as powerful internally as it is externally. So I get an email. What's Ron's email signature look like? What's the message look like? What's the tone of the language? What's the frequency? What's the quality of that interaction? That's a brand experience. When my board of directors is around the table and we hand out the agenda for the meeting, that's a brand opportunity right there. That piece of paper is a brand opportunity. Is it 10 point Times New Roman black on white font that says, minutes, report, adjourn? Or is it branded? Does it have objectives on it? Is it warm? Is it inviting? Is it welcome? Does it make me feel like this is my meeting? I'm a part of this. I want to be there. So this is what I say to leaders. Every moment, every interaction with your team and people is a connection moment, and it is an experience with you every single moment. The cameras are rolling for the people that are following you, and they're paying attention to every single moment. So how do we seize those moments? Keep the cameras rolling in our mind that every interaction we have is an opportunity to connect deeper, which draws out more engagement, creates more trust. We've talked about trust a lot too, and the deficiencies that we have in that today. So yeah, I think focus on the quality of the connection and then focus on the quantity.
Yeah, absolutely. I endorse, the quality of every connection is important for all leaders. And so when you're thinking about leaders, can you think of the best advice you've probably been given as a leader that you still use today?
Yeah. And it happened a little bit later on in my leadership career journey. I may have told you this story, Ron, before, but I had a leader tell me once, I had a conflicting situation and I blamed the other
Yeah.
parties. And to this day, if I were to walk through the story of what happened, I would say, it is what it is.
Yes.
But her advice to me was not, oh, Patrick, you poor thing. They were so wrong. I can't believe, her advice to me, she held up her finger and kind of wagged it and she said, be careful. And I said, be careful of what? She goes, be careful that you don't carry this around with you, playing victim, blaming someone else, and not learning from the situation. What was your role in this? And that stopped me dead in my tracks. I didn't want to hear it at the time. She was absolutely right. And as I paused on it over time, I realized, yeah, I had a bigger role in this than I want to admit. And what did I learn from it? And how do I mitigate it happening again? And how do I move forward from it as a better person? So, really, that was the best advice. And I use it now all the time in my coaching when a coachee is saying, what do I do about Bob? Bob won't do this, or Bob always does this. I say, well, Bob's not in the room, so we can't coach Bob. What's your role in this? How can
Yes.
you respond and react in a different way that might change the game? How can you influence Bob in other ways? What might you be doing that's leading Bob? It's all about what's my responsibility in this. I mean, you and I both had tremendous advice through the years from so many people, but that one jumped immediately to the front of my brain when you asked that question. Be
Yeah.
careful.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing, Patrick, because you're absolutely right. What's your role? And leaders do have a role. And so I thank you for being transparent on that, because I think every leader has a moment that defines who you're going to become. There's somebody that kind of gave you something that didn't feel good, felt like the worst medicine at that moment, that slowed you down and helped you reflect on who you're trying to become, not who you want to be seen as. So I'm glad you shared that. So, Patrick, I've noticed over the years and over time, you're a constant learner. How important is that for leaders, regardless where they are, to be constantly getting better? What would you share for people that feel like they've arrived, or get frustrated because the world is changing fast, and everybody's going to have to get reskilled at some point at the rate that we're going on something? What is your advice to leaders that are listening to us and watching us about how important it is to constantly stay in a learning mode?
Learn or be irrelevant. I mean, it really is a choice between those two things. You will be irrelevant soon if you're not constantly learning. Ask Bed Bath and Beyond, ask Blockbuster, ask Kodak, learn or die. Or at worst, just be irrelevant and be insignificant. And that's as good as death to me,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I get excited, energized by learning. We know the science behind the effort to learn as we grow older. It's more and more important that we get intentional about it so that our brains stay as healthy as they possibly can as we age. So, yeah, if I don't learn, I'm irrelevant. When I launched this business, it was technically launched in like 2007 part time. I would say full time, I launched this in 2016. And, I'm a strategic planning freak. So I can't wait. I get to do strategic planning for my own company. This is awesome. I build this strategic plan. In 90 days, I realized, wow, I didn't have a clue where I was. I didn't know what I was doing. I got to regroup. Wrong plan. I learned so much from launch to 90 days about what I was and wasn't doing right and how I wasn't thinking about this right. That's how fast the learning curve is from a startup. Now, fast forward to 2023, this because you're on our advisory board. We're looking at a refresh a little bit later in the brand. We'll talk more about it as the summer goes on, but we're refreshing not just to refresh the brand, but we're moving in a direction in a business that we know is going to be needed to keep us relevant, which means to make sure that the value that we're bringing to you is relevant.
Yes.
So, Ed, if you're asking how critical learning is, it's a choice. Learn or become irrelevant really fast.
Wow. Yes. Yes. In the space, if you're in a leadership role, you kind of have to model what you want other people to do. So you don't get to take the back seat and say, I've arrived.
That's
It's
the hard part,
Yeah, that's
modeling.
the hard part. Yeah, modeling what you're telling everybody else to continue to get better so they can remain relevant while you allow yourself not to do it. So you got to be really careful of your audio not matching your video as you go forward. So,
Oh, that's
Patrick,
so good. We talk about self-care all the time. I
yes,
mean, It's easy for me to coach my leaders and say, now, how are you recharging? Where are you finding your recharge energy from? And how are you giving yourself space? And are you getting, and if my leaders turn around and say, man, that's such a great question. How do you do it? I can't be stuck and go, actually, I don't. Like, that's something I need to work on too. Who wants to listen to that? Who wants to get coached from someone who can't model what you're doing? So that's where it comes back into coaching myself. And, oh, am I asking myself these questions? Super critical.
Yeah. So, Patrick, give me one more thing to unpack before we close out. How do you, as a leader, you said something that's super important, this work-life balance. I don't use the term. I'm not a fan of it, to be quite
Yeah,
honest.
me neither, really.
I'm a work-life integration. I mean, I think
Yeah.
for me, that's the language I use. And right, wrong,
Same
and
here.
that's what I use that helps me. How do you help leaders? It's Mental Health Awareness Month. People are busier than ever, responding to more things, multitasking, which I don't believe in, more than ever before. How do you help leaders? What advice would you share with leaders to slow down and practice self-care and pay attention to what they need? Why most of us want to serve everyone else, but we forget to serve us. What advice do you give to leaders that are struggling with this balancing act, if you will, of taking care of themselves while also not losing sight of the organization?
Yeah. I've started doing something pretty recently in my coaching as part of a model. When I'm coaching leaders who have direct reports, for example, and they're trying to be better leaders to those people, I have a concept or a tenet that I call the 5-point plan.
Yes.
It can apply to almost anything. So in coaching, it's a great mechanism to say, okay, what would your 5-point plan be for engaging your board at a higher level?
Yes.
And you can't use 4 points and you can't use 6. It has to be exactly 5. If you had to come up with 5 things that you as a leader, only 5 things, what had those 5 things better be? What's that plan? So in what I've started to do with leaders now is I'll ask them their 5-point plan for leading John. What's your 5-point plan for leading Susie? And I'll throw this in. What's your 5-point plan for leading yourself? What is that plan? And ask them to write that out and think about it between now and the next time we get together, because that's where they have to stop and go, oh, yeah, am I leading myself? Am I thinking about myself? So if that includes that balance or integration or whatever you want to call it, great. We can play off that. We can unpack it, as you would say.
Yes.
If it doesn't include it, the door is open for me to ask, where is the space for this? And catch them on that. So it's still all done through questions and it's still them doing the heavy lifting, but I ask them to reflect on it. And the goal is if they can come around to, boy, leading myself, gosh, the first thing I got to do is I got to give myself some grace. I got to not be so hard on myself. I got to give myself time to refresh. And if they can come to that on their own through that process, that's when the light really goes off.
Yeah.
Not just me saying, oh, and by the way, make sure you do self-care.
Yes.
They all know that, and I can tell them that, but it doesn't mean anything until they come around to it and realize it's part of the mechanism for leading myself as I lead others.
Awesome. Phenomenal insight for those of you that are listening. I told you enjoy the conversation, and I've enjoyed the conversation. The question, and we hear this quite often, Patrick, what do you tell the leader that says, I don't have time?
I'm glad you asked me that one because I have a strong bent on that. I go, come again? You don't have time? Say what that means. I don't have time. You don't possess time. You don't have any time. What do you call what you're living in right now? It's not time, not yours. So I tell people that managing time management is a misnomer because we can't manage time, can't create it. People say, well, I got to find the time's not lost. You're not going to find time. I need to make the time. Oh, you're going to manufacture time? Really? You're going to add a 25th hour in the day? Cool. Let me know how you do that. So what I ask people to do is manage their energy and don't think about where you're spending your time. Think about where your energy goes. Where's your energy being spent? People do time studies. What about energy audits? What if we did an audit each week of where most of our energy is going and we drew it in a pie chart? Is it going and responding to emails? Is it playing on Facebook? Is it donor calls? Is it endless hour-long meetings that are unproductive? Where is your energy being spent? The time will take care of itself. You got to focus on your bandwidth and your energy. I heard Dr. Kim Hires, who's been on my show before, and she's a phenomenal expert and researcher in burnout. And I love the way she said it. I've stolen it. And it is this: you can't replenish time. You can replenish energy. So manage something that you actually can manage. It's actually within your influence. Time is not in our control. So, but ourselves, that's in our control. Our energy and where we spend it is in our control. And if we're spending a ton of energy on HR issues so that we can't do CEO work, we would call it time. We would say, oh, I'm spending so much time on this stuff. What's really happening is you're spending energy on it. And it's sapping the energy. It's sapping that energy that really needs to be plugged in somewhere else. So I tell people, don't think of it in terms of time.
Yes, phenomenal. And I totally agree that it is energy. So, Patrick, I mean, you shared a lot with us. What would you share with our audience? 3 key takeaways that you like to share with them before we close out today?
3 key takeaways from today's conversation?
Yeah, what would you share with them? Say, hey, here are 3 things as a leader that you may want to do. 3 things you share as advice points.
Oh, man. I think pause for figuring out what the leadership work is. We get sucked in really quick to what the work is.
Yes.
Got to write, I got to finish this grant. I got to plan this board meeting. I got to fire a staff person. I got to interview. I got to do blah, 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 blah. What's the leadership to-do list?
Yes.
Pause and think about that. Where am I delegating opportunity this week? Where am I casting vision this week? Who am I developing this week and how? What behaviors am I using to build trust this week? So that'd be number 1. Build a leadership to-do list and think about your week in that way. If you're a leader, then they're paying you to lead. So what is the leadership to-do list? The second thing I would say, I've already said, and that is connect with your people as often as you can, but more importantly, as quality as you can. And I think the third thing, a good takeaway, you brought up learning. That is a good one. I don't want to just get lazy and say, let's use that one, but that really is one. Stretch. I would just add to learning and say, stretch. Go a little further than you think you can. Believe that you can, what would happen if I learned how to do this? I saw something the other day about how you can learn to do almost anything in 20 hours if you do it right. If you spend the learning time right. Now, I don't know the research behind it. It could be hogwash, but it's a provocative thought, isn't it? That if we were intent enough to learn something, we could do it. Are we stretching ourselves?
Yes. The human brain is phenomenal, what it can learn. So, Patrick, you shared 3 things that you gave to people is leader to-do list, leader to-do list, not tasks that someone else can be doing, connect, and learning, stretch yourself. So as you're listening and as we close out, those are 3 things that Patrick has dropped, for you to leverage and become more effective as a leader. So, Patrick, if someone wanted to leverage your services or reach out to you, what is the best way to reach out to you?
Probably the easiest way that everybody has access to is the website, which is jinksperspective.com, JINKS perspective.com. A lot of people spell it JINX, which it feels that way sometimes, but it's not. It's JINKS perspective.com. And there's ways to contact me from there. And, our space is largely with the nonprofit sector, not exclusively, but that's where the mission bent is and where the experience and the passion lie and where I think I'm creating the most value. So thank you for giving me that opportunity.
Awesome. Patrick, friend of mine, a colleague in the space. I love the conversations we always have and the relationships and the friendship we've built. So thank you for saying yes and sharing with our audience some of the things that, I always try to bring people on that really share a lot of value. I mean, there's just a lot to be shared amongst people that come together. So thank you for sharing that. And for those of you that are following us, again, Ron Harvey, Vice President, Chief Operating Officer, Global Core Strategies and Consulting, where we develop leaders to be better connected, to take care of the people they're responsible for and responsible to. Thank you for joining us on Unpacked with Ron Harvey. And until next time, have a wonderful day.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of Turning Point Leadership with your host, Ron Harvey. We're so glad you joined us. Remember to join us every first and third Mondays and expect to receive real answers for real leadership challenges. Until next time, make a difference where you are and with what you have. There are those who are counting on you for effective leadership.